Welcome back to another episode of Offbeat Adventures. We're standing here once again on the grade of the former Canadian Northern Railway and later Canadian National Railways, Dorion, and then subsequently Kinghorn Subdivision. We're kind of in the middle of nowhere. We are north of the community of Nipigon, Ontario, just to the east of another former community by the name of Cameron Falls. It's still kind of known by Cameron Falls. We're just to the south of Hogarth Station. And so what we're doing here is we're on this power cut here. We're picking up right where we left off on a previous hike that we did a couple of weeks ago. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to work our way from this spot, from this power cut, to the south, or to the west, I guess, on the railway grade, toward McCaskill Station. And so this hike is another redo. So we had previously been through this area a couple years ago. So we were here in August of 2020, and we're here to redo this section because since that time there's a lot of new information that's emerged, and so we want to sort of bring everything up to date and make sure we kind of get the full experience. I was through here last fall again with my boys. We were out here for a walk, so we kind of got an even better kind of lay of the land. So just a couple of notes about today's hike. First of all, kind of a little note about the time of the year and the weather. So we're in the third week of October. You can see many of the trees have lost their leaves. You can kind of get a sense of the time of the year with the yellow. You can see these yellow trees here. These are tamaracks, and it seems like every hike we talk about the tamaracks. So the tamaracks are a species of larch. And they're one of the few coniferous trees that lose their needles. So at this time of the year, they turn a very brilliant shade of yellow, as you can see. And then soon they will lose all their needles and then regrow them again in the spring. And we did have some rain yesterday, and so the bush is a little bit wet. My feet are wet. Made a bad idea here by wearing a white shirt. And so I'm a little bit dirty from going down and taking a look at a few things. It's kind of cloudy today, which is okay, because it certainly helps with some of the contrast to do the recording. The other note is, unfortunately, I'm not at 100%. There is some sort of, I've been calling it the plague. There's something going around the schools. It seems like everyone is sick. My boys were sick starting last weekend, and then I got it. Today I'm actually not doing too bad. It's still in my my chest a little bit, where it's it's a little hard to breathe, but feeling a lot better than I was, say for example on Thursday. I thought I was going to die. So whatever it is, it's awful that's going around. So. It does feel good to get out. I don't know if I'm going to pay for this a little bit later, so hopefully not. Okay, so while we have a minute here, we have our first kind of stop coming up just up there. So our usual history lesson. So this line was constructed by Canadian Northern Railway between 1911 and 1914. It was going to be one of the final pieces in Canadian Northern's transcontinental line. The Canadian Northern Company got their start in Manitoba back in 1896 by acquiring some charters and building some lines and things like that. Their first big project was the construction of a line between the then city of Port Arthur, which is now Thunder Bay, and Winnipeg, and that happened between 1899 and 1902. Just very quickly before we continue on here, you can see kind of a little bit of the geography of this area. We're going to alternate between kind of swampy areas and more upland areas. Obviously, this is one of the swampy areas. You can see, obviously, which looks like a sort of a big beaver pond here. You can see all the black spruce, the black spruce that are kind of growing in there. Okay. Milepost marker here. You can see 110.70. We're gonna talk about that in a second because it's going to tie in with what we're going to be taking a look at a little bit further up. Anyway, so once Canadian Northern had built their line between Port Arthur and Winnipeg, they began building all kinds of lines throughout the prairies, and Canadian Northern sort of became synonymous with the northern prairies. Around the same time, they also started building lines and acquiring charters from Toronto going north. eventually reaching up into the Sudbury area. Now, around this time, Canadian Northern realized that in order for their company to be profitable long-term, that they would need a transcontinental connection. However, Canadian Northern was very hesitant to build such transcontinental connection, particularly this section right here. And the reason being, the line between Port Arthur and Sudbury, particularly Ruel, where the end of steel was outside of Sudbury, was going to be very difficult, excuse me, and then therefore very expensive. And so they were very hesitant to build it. They also were questioning the profitability of the line. So they looked at all kinds of different options in terms of building the line. And unfortunately, none of it, panned out. They looked at a running rights agreement with Canadian Pacific and things like that. So they were forced to build. So again, construction lasted from 1911 till 1914. So on New Year's Day 1914, the last spike was driven. And the line opened for traffic in 1950. Now, unfortunately, just as the line was opened for traffic, Canadian Northern began running into financial difficulties brought on by construction costs. For example, building through the mountains of British Columbia, building this line, and then also a lot of the financial pressures as a result of World War I. So by 1917, the Canadian Northern Company was in serious financial trouble and had to be taken over by the Canadian government. And in 1918, they were forced to merge, amalgamate, whatever descriptor you want to use, with a bunch of other Canadian government-owned bankrupt lines known as the Canadian Government Railways. And that merger produced the Canadian National Railways. The nationalization process took 5 years to complete, and that culminated with the absorption of the Grand Trunk lines. So in 1923, the name of this line changed. It had originally been the Nipigon Subdivision of Canadian Northern Railway, and then it became the Dorion Subdivision of Canadian National Railways. Just before we move on, again, tying in with our stop here, we do have a milepost marker. So the milepost marker is 110.98, and I'm going to explain that in a second here. So the Dorion Subdivision continued to operate until 1960. 1960s, there was a major reorganization with CN. They adopted their modern logo that everybody knows very well. And they did a lot of realigning and rejiggling of their lines, including this one. So what happened is there was a merger between the Dorion subdivision and the more easterly Kinghorn subdivision. And that merger resulted in one line from Long Lac to Port Arthur, which was known as the Kinghorn subdivision. And that continued to operate until 2005, when Canadian National decided to discontinue service, and the rails were pulled up starting in 2008 and completed in 2010. Now, the reason why I pointed out that culvert back there at 110.98 is because right here somewhere, I looked this time, I looked when I was here last year, can't find it. They were supposed to be, Luna, come here. There was supposed to be the milepost marker for 111. Can't find it. Looked and looked and looked, so I'm guessing it was removed. Okay, so milepost 111 is the mileage on the Kinghorn. So for the previous versions of this line, the previous iterations of this line, the mileage is a little different. So the Kinghorn started in Long Lac, whereas the Nipigon subdivision and the Dorion subdivision started in Jellicoe. And so in order to calculate mileage on those lines, you need to subtract 49.7 miles. So milepost 111 becomes milepost 61.3. Now, the reason why that's significant is because we actually have a little point of interest coming up here. So there's another culvert here. And so this one, it's a little bit harder to read, but it says 111.02. So the milepost marker was supposed to be in between those two culverts. Now, right up here, you'll notice on the, what direction are we heading in here? Almost south. So on the east side of, west side of the grade, you'll see there's this flat area here. So you'll see this little bit of a flat area here, okay? In particular, you can see something right here, okay? Then here, there is a culvert, okay? And the mileage on this culvert is, it's a little hard to see on there, but it's 111.07. So that translates into, on the original lines, that translates into 61 0.37. Now, why is that significant? Okay, because basically right here, you can see there's another flat area right here. Excuse me. There was a flag stop here for a number of years. And so if we kind of come up into this area here, again, you can kind of see this flat area. You can see almost like, it looks like there's a road or a trail that kind of going that way. Looks like there's something heading up this way. And so the dates for that flag stop, sorry, I got to get my notes out here, because this section, particularly when we get to McCaskill, there's a lot going on, so I can't remember everything that's happening here, and I want to make sure I'm doing it right. So the stop here was on timetables from 1939 till 1930, from 1939 to 1946. So there was a flag stop here at 61.4. Then for 1 year in 1940, there is a spur that shows up that apparently was used by the Hewitson Construction Company. It was a 4-car spur that was connected to the east end, so somewhere over here. And again, it was only used for 1 year. Now, why was there a spur here? What was it used for? That's an interesting question. And same thing with the flag stop. Again, we're kind of in the middle of nowhere. So, I mean, what are the options? Well, I mean, it could have had to do with some sort of logging operation. But when you hear stuff like the Hewitson Construction Company, starting to think a little bit, maybe it had to do with maybe the construction of the highway that was happening in, nearby in the area. It could have been power lines just further ahead on the railway grade as we move towards McCaskill. You get closer to Cameron Falls. Cameron Falls is one of a number of generating stations on the Nipigon River. And we just passed a major power cut over there. So it could have been part and parcel of construction of power lines. I'm not entirely sure. So maybe there'll have to be a little bit more research into that. Anyway, so what we're going to do is we're going to hold up here for a second, and then we're going to continue working our way to the south here along the grade.